I've got next to me here a Cooke Mk-2 25 to 250 zoom lens that's almost completely disassembled. The lens came down because it had taken a shot in shipping, which knocked one of the roller and spring assemblies in the converter group out of its guide track. And because of that, the lens would bind heavily at 150 millimeters. It was real evident it had a deep down problem. So I had completely disassembled the lens, and upon reassembling, I found a much easier way to put the final piece in the puzzle. You might remember when Keith Foster was in Dallas in the winter of '87 for this training seminar. He showed us this among other Cooke lenses, and you may remember that this was the most difficult part of any of the lenses to get back together. We each had a shot at it, and we each fumbled with it slightly, and it was at best difficult to get this converter assembly back together. I'm going to be working for the camera because I have the camera sitting here, I have a soft light, and I've got a remote zoom control, and I've got no operator. So I'm going to try my best to work for the camera. As you can see, this converter assembly is completely together. I had disassembled it day before yesterday, and after checking for damage and completely cleaning, reassembled it yesterday. You remember that stop and see how nice and easily it goes from side to side? Before I took the converter apart, it would move to about there, which was about the 150 millimeter mark, and that's where it would just stop dead. It could be forced past, but it's certainly not a healthy thing to force zoom lenses. So that's why it came apart. It is completely reassembled. However, I'm going to stop the tape in a moment, and I'm going to disassemble this converter. It's already lubed, so I'm not going to be cleaning and re-lubing the balls. That's all stuff that you guys have done, and you know how to do it. That's pretty simple stuff. However, what I am going to do is reassemble it in a different order than what Keith had showed us in the fall of '87. And I found it to be much quicker and much simpler than the way Keith had shown us. And it's a method that doesn't take 3 or 4 or 5 tries on a bad day. It's a method that takes 1 try on a bad day, and then you're ready to put the lens back together. Okay, and I'm going to stop the tape and disassemble this thing, and I will go into the reassembly. Well, I've got the lens groups out of the main housing. I'm going to go a little bit tight here and show you how far I've pulled it down. That's about good. Okay, here is the main barrel. This is actually part of the lens mainframe here. Okay, and as you can see by the cam slot in there, this is also a part of the converter. Okay, this there, you can see some grease. That's the down number 7 kind of glopped around here and there, and that's from the roller and cage assemblies. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to kind of get this out of the picture. And here's my little Cooke block. Isn't that cute? It's a 2x4, and you know, mega dollars worth of work there. Here is the inner assembly, or you may want to call it a converter sub-assembly, but it is also cam slotted, as you can see that, and we have the lens groups inside of here. In fact, it's free floating. There's the one lens group and the other lens group, of course, in the rear there. There it is up inside. Now this portion here I didn't have to disassemble at all. You remember there's roller and spring assemblies in there, and what is retaining this all together at the moment is this this piece here, which is guides. We've got 2 plastic guides, and we have got a glipped and pinned assembly that is screwed to this moving element group here, and this is something we need not touch. If you have optical problems with the lens, of course you're going to have to go into that, but just for reassembly of the converter group, let's say that you have already done whatever you had to do with these optics, and you have already got that lens assembly slid back in there and your guides back in place, and this retaining face or cover screwed back on, which is also, it also retains this assembly. In fact, right there before our plastic stops hit the end of that slot, the roller, which you can just see right in there, is touching this mask. Okay, so that's all in there. Okay, I'm going to slide this a little bit to the back of the picture. I'm going to go a little bit wider, and I'm going to bring our one housing back into the picture here, this main housing. I think we'll park a little something over here just to keep this from possibly rolling around. Okay, my ball and cage assemblies are already lubed. They've already got the MS4, I'm sorry, the Dow MS4 is what is used on the ball and cage assemblies. The Dow number 7 is the lubricant used for the cam followers and slots. So this is the lubrication you were seeing kind of glipped around on the inside of this barrel here. Okay, this MS4, as you've known by looking at it, is also, it's pretty sturdy stuff. It's almost like a silicone. And it's also good stuff to use to help keep certain things in place during reassembly. I had used it, I used it down inside the lens. Let me try to bring it into focus. There, we've got it somewhat in focus there. There's a slot. Let me see if I can get it in focus in the picture. And there it is, way down inside there, up where my Q-tip is going here. Boy, it's a hell of a thing trying to work for the camera. There is the slot that is for that roller and spring assembly, and that kind of guides it in place. Okay, and what I've done is I've glipped a little bit of this MS4 on there to help hold that in place when I put it on there. Okay, I'm going to remove this out of the picture. We'll be back. And as you remember in the seminar with Keith, we were to be careful to keep the spring and roller assemblies separated from one another because they are individually bent to provide different amounts of spring tension on both the front and the rear of the lens. I'm also using this MS4 to help I guess I lost focus somewhere in here. I'm also using this MS4 to help tack these wheel assemblies in place as I assemble these, because they're kind of hard to keep stuck where they're supposed to go. So there I'm going to sort of stick a wheel assembly in there, and you can see that stuff makes pretty good glue. I'm knocking this around a bit and it's all staying together. Now here I'm going to try to insert, the first thing I'm going to do is insert the ball and cage assembly. I'm going to set my spring and roller assembly aside. And this is the rearmost, or I should say the smaller diameter portion of the converter. So I'm using the smaller radius of the two ball and cage assemblies here. And I can see right now I might have to reposition this camera. There's a large area in there. Let me see if I can make the camera see it, where you can see that grease in there, and that is where this ball and cage assembly goes. You can see what I've got here. I'm going to go ahead and place it in there. I'm not going to work for the camera right at this moment because I have to kind of work for myself. But I'm putting the ball and cage assembly in, and I'm sort of centering in between its two stops, and I have pushed it all the way to the rear, or what would be aiming toward the rear element in the iris assembly. See, I have pushed it all the way back against the back, and it's pretty well centered in between those two stops. However, it will center itself in further assembly. The thing will center itself in there. Okay, but you can see what I've done there. It's in place, and it's got plenty of lube on it, so it's gonna stay in place. Even if I tip it up a little bit, it'll stay there. Now I'm going to put on the rearmost roller and cage assembly. And if you remember, in the assembly procedure we used before, what we had done is we had assembled all the spring and cage and stuff in the front of the assembly here, and then we had gone in through the back, and with our fingers we had to, let me see if I can get a little bit tighter to describe this. We had to hold this portion of it up against the balls with our hands while we put that spring down into place. Okay, what I'm doing here is in the opposite order. I'm going to put that spring in there first, and the last spring assembly I'm going to put in is the one in front. And I think you'll see how much quicker and easier this goes and how much less aggravating it is. Okay, God, why don't they do depth of field on these silly cameras? Anyway. Okay, and here I'm putting it in focus, and up in the top of the picture right here by the shadow of my fingers, that is the track, or the guide track, that I have to place the right angle bent end of that spring and roller assembly into. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to place that in there, and I can't work for the camera at this time, but I'm going to place that in there, and then I'll show you where I have put it and how I've put it. I'm just using a pair of tweezers to place it in place. Now remember, I've used the Dow MS4 to help keep the right angled portion of the spring and roller assembly located. At this point, the thing's so wide open, there's nothing in the way. You can work from either end of the lens to get everything in place. Okay, it's in there. Let me see if I can show it to the camera. Okay, there it is. You can see it's towed in there. Okay, it's towed in place. We've still got up in the top there, you can see our roll, or our ball and cage assembly. It's just kind of hanging on the grease. But anyway, everything's in there and it's happy. Now comes another fun part. I have got to insert this entire inner barrel portion, and to do that, I also, in this cam slot, you can just kind of see it in the light. In fact, you can see where it is, where it's coming to an end here. And let me see if I can get a little reflection on there. It's coming to an end. I have a cam follower right here. It's not in place, actually. The cam follower is sitting here on the table. But I have to insert this tail end small diameter first and get this follower here to mesh into place with this slot. Now I am going to stop the tape again for a moment and get set up for this portion of it. It's just a matter of getting my stuff situated here on the table. It's more of a time-saving factor because I need to save time on this tape. Okay, where I am now is I have turned the barrel around. I have my piece of shim stock. We do still need a piece of shim stock to do one assembly portion. You may be able to get away without it, but I used a piece of shim stock and had real good luck with it. Okay, this assembly is just simply plugged in here. It's just sitting in here. I have the large open face of this barrel, or this converter portion, facing toward me, and that just so happens to put the entrance of this cam slot right about here. It's kind of facing up at me. All right, I have the spring in place on that small shaft there, and here I have my cam follower, and that goes on, of course, taper up to fit in the cam slot. Okay, the track there is already well lubed, although I am going to put a little dab more of the Dow number 7 compound onto my cam follower because I have been handling a lot, and I do want to get some of that lubricant back into those little dimples. Okay, now this came out of here round side in. The rounded side of that cam follower was facing into the rear edge of the lens, the rear end of the lens there. So I'm going to put it back in the same way. What I've got here is a lint-free wipe. I'm just wiping off a little extra goop that I've gotten around by handling it. Okay. Now you may remember, as we had put this in there before, we had to use a stick, or even, you know, a tongue depressor for that matter would work, to hold it down into place. What I ended up doing is I actually ended up using one of my fine blade screwdrivers and very carefully pushing that guide down into place and putting it in there. I'm going to kind of lift this up and show you that it is in there. You can see in the top here that little bit of movement. I stopped the tape because I was just burning a lot of tape fiddling with this thing, and I was rushing because I was trying to, you know, get this information on the tape. But anyway, that is in there, and my cage and balls are still in the rear of this, and also my spring and follower is still in here. I'm going to stop the tape again, turn this around, and show you what is happening from this end of the assembly. Okay, I've got the piece turned around, and I've upped the light a little bit to try to iris down, maybe get a little more depth of field, so what I'll be doing here is a little bit more in focus. You can see right in there the roller and spring assembly, and you can also see that inner barrel just touching it. Okay, my ball and cage assembly is still up in place, and it is moved all the way to the iris end of this assembly. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to be able to work for the camera here, is I am going to reach in, similar to the way we did it with Keith, and depress that spring down and then slide this barrel just up over it. And once I've got it that far, once I've got the darn thing that far, it will be really a quite simple matter of getting the barrel itself underneath that ball and cage assembly. And let myself slide out of my guides a little bit. Luckily, with this way though, without having any ball and cage assemblies or roller and springs on the other end of the assembly, if you do screw up and have that spring pop out a little bit, you can reach in there and put it back in place without having the whole thing grenade on you. Okay, it's not all that harrowing a deal like it was before. Okay, now let me see. And here I'm gonna fiddle with it some more, but that's okay. That's what training is all about. Okay, now I've just set that over there. Okay, those rollers are just up underneath that lip, and as you can see here, the tangs are just up out of there a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in here, I'm going to push down on that barrel so it pushes the tangs down into place, seats all this stuff here, and then I'm going to slide this barrel, this inner barrel here, forward, and that will bring it up underneath this ball and cage assembly. And I'm just pushing it down into place, and it's over. Okay, you notice the little edit there. Well, I had to stop because I was fiddling with the spring for a moment. But nevertheless, I pushed down, got the tangs of the spring down into the guide slot, and then by just holding down on the barrel and sliding rearward, you can see here we're in, and we've got some nice stuff there in between the two barrels. And by sliding rearward, it seated the inner barrel up underneath the ball and cage assembly, and it also brought the spring and roller assembly all the way to the rear, and it is in the tangs there. Now I'm going to stop the tape again, turn the entire assembly around, and show you how to finish it up. Well, I did have to go to a second tape so I can relax a little bit now. I've got another 20 minutes to burn. I've turned the whole thing around there. Here's my nice little Cooke block. I've turned it around. The ball and cage assembly is all the way to the rear. I'm just faking this, but also the spring and roller assembly is all the way to the rear. Look at that, we can still go farther back. Anyway, that inner assembly, that inner lens group is all the way to the rear. And now, as you remember, the ball and cage assembly and the roller and spring assembly move forward at half the pace of the inner barrel. So now we're going to have to pull this inner barrel out to place the second ball and cage assembly and also roller and spring assembly in place. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm turning the lens over. because this large area here in between these two stops is where that the forward-facing ball and cage assembly is going to go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just pull this out a little bit. I've still got my lens assemblies coming there forward too, and you can see the amount of room I have here. I've got just enough room here where I can take my larger forward ball and cage assembly and go ahead and set that baby right in there. Okay, now that's in place. That's all there is to that. Okay, that thing's in there. Now what I can do is go ahead and turn this back over, and you can see just toward me here, and you can see it slot a little bit the way I've got the light there. You might be able to see that little slot there. Here's the guide. Okay, here's the guide for that second or the forward-facing spring and roller assembly. Okay, right now the weight of this barrel has got it resting right on that the ball and cage assembly, so that's going to pretty much stay there for me. However, I do need to bring this out a little bit, and I'm keeping that roller and cage from coming out past the lip, or it's going to fall out. I'm sort of keeping it pressed in there. So I got to bring this forward now, because what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take this spring and roller assembly and insert it against this barrel, and so the tangs go up into these slots on this piece. I know this lighting is terrible, I'm sorry. I guess I'll never be a gaffer or whatever, but anyway, you can see that post there. This post is where that guide slot is. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this block here. I'm going to try to maybe get this at a different angle. And let's see if we can maybe change perspective a little bit. Maybe I can come in a little bit tighter. Where am I? There I is. Okay. Here I am. You can see how I've got this out there. You can see my ball and cage assembly just up underneath there. And the thing is sitting together. It's okay just the way it is. It's not going to just fall apart laying here on the table. And I guess I did my fiddling before with the way it was before rather than as the last thing like we have to do before. But with this being this way, you won't have the ball and cage assemblies falling out on you if you don't hit it the first time like we did before. They will stay in there. They're in there. The one in the rear of the assembly is now pinned between you know, it's pinned in there with the roller and spring assembly and with this inner barrel in here. It's all pinned in place. It's not going anywhere. And the inner assembly is now laying on this lower ball and cage assembly, so it's not going anywhere. And here I have, let me go a little bit wider here. Here I have the forward spring and roller arrangement. I'm going to take a little bit more of this nice gooey Dow Corning MS4 and put a little goop on my places here, so I won't have that roller falling out the way I just did. Okay, that's on there. I've just retrieved my roller. I've just lost another one. That's okay, they all go back in. Okay, in fact I'm going to goop these other rollers in just a little bit to kind of keep them in place while I am doing this last critical assembly here. Okay, I get goop on that. It's all together. It's not going to just up and fall apart here. Now this is a really simple assembly. All I'm doing here is I'm setting this on top of that inner barrel. Okay, and while I'm setting it on top of that inner barrel here, I am placing those tangs in the slots. Let me see if I can turn this around a little bit. Maybe I can come a little bit tighter here. Let's see what we can get. Okay, you can see the position of this thing. You can see where the slot is. Okay, I've got that just in. I've got that tang just inside there. Okay, and there it is. It's just sitting in place. Now what I'm going to do here is, let me see if I can come at it from the other side. Maybe I can go a little bit wider to describe. I'm going to push down on that center roller, and that will bring the tangs up into their slot and also put that roller inside of that barrel. And then as I'm pushing it down, I'm going to slide it home. Okay, and let's see if it goes that easy. Well, it almost wanted to slide right home, eh? But nevertheless, nope, my tangs came out. Get back here, you villain, you. Okay, that's there, and I'm pushing down on the roller, and I'm sliding it home. Okay, now I've got to reposition my barrel a little bit here because I was hitting over here on that lip. But anyway, that darn thing is home as home gets. Now I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to put this mask on. I'm gonna turn the tape off while I'm doing this, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this mask on. Okay, the mask is in place. As you can see, I've got this front mask back on, and that will keep that will remove any possibility of an accidental forward sliding or whatever, having this roller and spring assembly come popping out on you, because this mask does retain that assembly. Okay, that's in place. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and put my zoom stop back into place. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, there's a good reflection. Okay, that is the zoom stop, as well as I believe this thing actually figures in with the actuator too. But anyhow, I'm going to put that back on. Okay. That's going to go back in. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to describe a couple other things. You may remember when we were doing the assembly with Keith Foster, he showed us as we were putting the ball and cage assemblies in that a couple of them we had to slide to one side or the other. Well, it seems that once you get through this assembly, they seem to locate themselves pretty well. When I did this yesterday, I didn't have any problem at all with them coming out of place or binding. You know, they just seem to slide themselves right to their design position once they're in place. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is you're looking right through to a cam slot. You can kind of see it go in and out of this hole, and we're going to put that cam follower and spring assembly back in place. Okay. Now, again, I can't really do this for the camera, but it's no big deal. This is something that you guys can do easily on your own. Alright, I'm going to put my cam follower in, of course, remembering how it had come out and how it goes back in. Let me get the right cam follower. Here we go, there's my cam follower. And I'm going to insert that baby straight down. While I'm on the subject of this, I don't know that it's on your lubrication chart because I don't believe I saw it on your lubrication chart. But keep in mind that the Rocal MTS 2000 is kind of like an anti-seize type grease, and it is the stuff that you'll be wanting to use on the steel shafts that insert in these brass inserts, because this little cam follower is molded or whatever pressed onto this brass insert. So the roll call, the MTS 2000, that's the good stuff for that. Okay, I'm going to place this down in here just the way it came out. It's a happy cam follower, it's home. I'm going to lay the lens flat again, or pretty flat, because what I've got to do is I've got to set the spring, the tension spring, down on top of the darn thing, and then insert. Here's my tension spring. Where's a little bit of background? There's the background. Here's my tension spring. I'll get that lint the heck out of there, eh? I'm going to set my tension spring down on there, and then I'm going to come down in with the axle assembly, or the pin assembly. Here it is, and that's threaded. There's a shaft on the end there. Okay. Now just set it down in place, and it just so happens that Airy tool A41A, or I'm sorry, A14A, which is a little spanner, just happens to be about the right size for this darn thing. So I found it to be a pretty handy little tool. There, and that's going home, and that's nicely snug, and my lens barrel is filthy, but that's okay. I'll clean that up later. This tape is just for the main purpose of showing you guys how to put this thing together without going through quite the aggravation we went through in training. Okay, now let me see what we've got here. Okay, all the balls and cages and all that good stuff have now located themselves, and that's a pretty happy converter assembly. I think I can go on now to reassemble the rest of the lens, and I really feel confident that this converter is going to be just fine because it has the correct feel to it. There's no binding, there's no hesitation, just a nice smooth transition from wide to long. You can hear the stop click. Okay, I'm happy with that. I've got it back together, and I didn't have to pull quite as much, quite as aggravating a last step in the process as I did before. I think that same spring in that same position, due to how tight it was getting in this portion, the iris end of the lens here, was still a little bit tricky, but not near as tricky as before, having to hold the inside up and press that down in there, and the one chance type thing where if you don't hit, everything flies apart and you got to start from scratch. It wasn't nearly that aggravating. I think the only reason I fiddled with it and had to edit is because I was trying to do everything quick for the tape. But yesterday, when I had put the thing together the first time, it was like 15 minutes and it was all together, and I was ready to put the rest of the lens together. So I hope this helps you guys out. The reason I did this is because, like I said, it was much simpler for me, and this was the only way I could convey it to you, I think, other than writing a small novel in the computer or talking your ear off for a half hour, 45 minutes on the phone. So hope this is useful to you, and don't be scared to put something on tape if you ever figure something out that's easier than the way we've been taught before, and send me a copy. Take care.